Just give me the high sign when we're ready to go. Was that you? And we're having just a few technical issues getting our live stream going, and so shortly. All right, so I can start? All right, very good. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final Tuesday in March program. Today, we're excited to have Meg Kissinger talking about 5 myths concerning mental illness. Although this is our last Tuesday program this year, we invite all of you to keep connected with the Interfaith Conference throughout the year. Our website at interfaithconference.org, we post updates on our programming that we're doing regularly. I would like to remind everyone that the Interfaith Conference does what we call our Amazing Faith Dinner Dialogue programs, where people get to share a meal and sit around a table and share stories. We do this the last Wednesday of every month, except this month. We didn't have one last night because of our pastors and religious leaders being busy with Holy Week. But we will be back on the last Wednesday in April, where we will be at First Congregational in Wauwatosa, and we will be continuing after that. And we have other programs and webinars as well throughout the year, and sometimes we advertise some of our community partners programs as well. So we urge you all to stay connected with the Interfaith Conference throughout the year. As is our tradition, we begin with a prayer offering, and this program, I am inviting Mr. Dick Smith of the Wauwatosa Baha'is to give that offering.
Good afternoon. Let me offer this prayer. O divine providence, this assembly is composed of thy friends who are attracted to thy beauty and are set ablaze by the fire of thy love. Turn these souls into heavenly angels. Resuscitate them through the breath of thy Holy Spirit. Grant them eloquent tongues and resolute hearts. Bestow upon them heavenly power and merciful susceptibilities. Cause them to become the promulgators of the oneness of mankind and the cause of love and concord in the world of humanity, so that the perilous darkness of ignorant prejudice may vanish through the light of the Sun of Truth. This dreary world may become illumined. This material realm may absorb the rays of the world of spirit. These different colors may merge into one color, and the melody of praise may rise to the kingdom of thy sanctity. Verily, thou art the omnipotent and the almighty.
Thank you. And now we will have our speaker today introduced by a very dear friend of mine, the former executive director of the Interfaith Conference from 2009 to 2019, Mr. Tom Heinen.
JC, are the technical difficulties resolved, or are you still?
Changes to do link out to everyone.
I know,
But it's being recorded, so they'll have to.
okay. Well, great. You know, I thought I was going to introduce Meg today, but then I know Meg and she's working the room and talking to people in line at the tables. I mean, she's probably already pumped you for information about her next book. You know, and as many mental health providers and government officials have discovered, she's a bit like an Irish version of Maria from Sound of Music, but on steroids. You know, so it's like, how do you solve a problem like Meg? You know, Meg causes good trouble. And so as the song goes, the lyrics, she'll outpester any pest, drive a hornet from its nest. She could throw a whirling dervish out of whirl. She is gentle, she is wild, and then I won't continue with the rest of it, but there's no surprises there. I worked in the newsroom of the Milwaukee Journal and Journal Sentinel for years when Meg was there. And so I have seen her in action. She is a force of nature, a fearless seeker of truth, a laughing, beloved buddy to many journalists, and a whole lot more. Her biography describes her as a Pulitzer Prize finalist who spent more than 2 decades traveling across the country to report on our nation's failed mental health system, winning dozens of national awards. She's a popular speaker at universities, civic organizations, and corporate events. She taught investigative reporting at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism and is a trainer in the school's Dart Center on Trauma and Journalism. And as I think you know, she's also an author. Her recently published book, While You Were Out, An Intimate Family Portrait of Mental Illness in an Era of Silence, is a really poignantly personal and vividly compelling story. Her unblinking, and I mean unblinking, and maybe blushing, but in a pursuit of truth, is just really a revelation of her Catholic Irish American family's secrets and her own, and it's nothing short of amazing. And as you will hear, her family was not the Von Trapp singers, but whose is? And that's kind of the theme here, partly, that we all have our secrets. I exclaimed, wow, more than once reading the book. It kind of touched some universal chords with my own mother, who was much more Irish than German, who used to pile us kids into the station wagon to chase fire engines. She wrote with a sponge huge letters on the ceiling of the kitchen Zorro when my dad hadn't gotten around to doing his chores and it was still dirty up there. So we were waiting in suspense to see what would happen, you know, and things always happened, you know, and so we had a 3-foot snake get loose, a black racer, in the car, packed with the 4 kids, grandma and mom and dad at Niagara Falls in the rain, trying to see the falls. And so once again, we were not the typical family. And I always used to think we were just slightly weird. Such chaotic scenes were so normal for us and were underpinned, I think, by mental health challenges that really weren't discussed. And so I got to tell you, Meg, thank you. And I now feel like I came from a normal family reading about yours. But through your courageous revelations in your writing and reporting, you've opened large and small doors to issues and emotions that really are often buried or mythologized, but are important to us all. I'm sure she has something that all of you will relate to, and there might even be a book or two left for sale back there. How many? 3 books? Pardon me? 3 left, yes. I'm seeing, well, it's either 6 or 3. 2 people held up 3 fingers, but I think it's 2. It's all yours, Smith.
Wow, that is a generous introduction. Thank you, thank you. Can you hear me? All righty, I'm so happy to be here. I'm a little nervous though. I haven't talked about my book in like a whole week, I think. So, but it's a friendly crowd, I can already tell. And so I know, it's so funny. Tom, first of all, you have to write your own book, sir, because I want to hear about that snake and how that all turned out. But, you know, when you write a book like the one I just wrote, I really left very little to the imagination. In fact, I might have done a little oversharing. So I feel like when I talk with people about this book, I know that they know me. If you've read the book, you know some of my deepest, darkest secrets. So, is the sound okay? Are we doing all right on the, okay. This is, can I lower it? Okay, there we go. Yeah, there we go. That's good. Oh, only one left. Woo, get them all hot. Anyway, I'm not here to sell books. I'm here to have a conversation with you all. And I'm here to share with you, you know, the wild adventures that I had that really began on a steamy August day in 1957. So, you know, as has been mentioned, I grew up in a big, wacky Irish Catholic family. I'm the 4th of 8 kids. And those kids were born in 11 years, which, well, 12. Anyway, not too unlike what I've come to know is really pretty typical of that era, especially when you're Catholic and they don't let you take birth control. But I have a funny scene in the very first part of the book about my mom going to confession because she really, really, really wanted to go on birth control. And I won't spoil it for you, but the family did stop there. Anyway, so I've always been naturally inclined to be very interested about what it is that causes people to suffer from mental illness. And I knew this from a little kid, from the time that I came downstairs when I was not quite 6 and I couldn't find my mom. And I looked all over the house for her, and she was nowhere to be seen. And I would later learn that she was at the hospital and she was being treated for a word that I'd never heard and wouldn't hear for many years, and that was postpartum depression. But it wasn't talked about. And so as we all came along, as the years unfolded, and one by one, people in my family began to suffer from depression or bipolar. It was another word that we never heard, but I would later come to know that that bipolar illness is something that my family suffers with in great numbers. And that took a terrible toll. You know, we ended up losing 2 siblings. Do you want to, I'm going to show you my family here. Well, that's the book. We already talked about that. There they are. Okay. So this is the crew. It looks like the Brady Bunch kind of, I don't know, maybe like, whatever. I'm the one on the right that needs braces. I eventually got them. And my hair is orange there because my sister Nancy, who's next to me, had the good idea to put summer blonde on my hair. And I was her guinea pig. She wanted to see if maybe she wanted to do summer blonde. But once my hair turned orange, she was like, nope, not going to do that. Anyway, I'm standing on a phone book there to clear my sister Patty said. My mom always dressed us alike, which I hated. I was the older sister in that crew, and I like didn't want to be dressing like my little sister. But my mom assured me that imitation is the greatest form of flattery. And so, so that was that. But we were a spirited bunch, lots of wonderful, happy times. But, you know, again, as the years unfolded, also, you know, a great deal of sorrow. So aren't my older sisters just total glamour pusses? They're so beautiful. And that was, I know it was really hard to grow up in the shadow of that. And they were very concerned about their looks too. I mean, they were blessed with the gift of beauty, but they sure enhanced it. They spent a long time in the bathroom every morning, really primping. And I had no use for that. I was just wanting to get off and get my day started. But anyway, there was a lot, as I said, a lot of joy. But as again, as we grew up, it became very apparent that many of us struggled with our mental health. And my sister Nancy, the glamour puss next to me, was the first to be the most greatly impacted. And she suffered greatly. And I'm sad to tell you that she ended up dying by suicide when she was 24 years old. And on the night that she died, my dad called us all into the living room, and he said, you know, in no uncertain terms, if anybody asks, this was an accident. And he wasn't saying that to be mean. He was very afraid, and with good reason, that our family would be denied the opportunity to give Nancy a proper Catholic burial. And one of his best friends had lost his son to suicide the year before. And that family was at St. Robert's Church in Shorewood. And indeed, that family was denied the opportunity to have a Catholic funeral. And that guy was not, his body was not permitted to be buried in a Catholic cemetery. So when my dad said that, it was, you know, that was his greatest fear. As it turned out, we did have a funeral for Nancy, and not just one, but 3 priests were up on the altar, and it was really quite a beautiful ceremony. But the tone had been set for our family that that mental illness is something you don't discuss. And again, if anybody asks, that it's an accident. And what that did in our minds, in our developing brains, was to really, and not to put this all on my dad, but the way that society regarded mental illness in that time was that it was a shame, and it was something to be embarrassed about and something to hide. And I have come to know that nothing good comes from shame. Shame is toxic, and shame can kill you. And so as we grew up in the shadow of Nancy's death and, you know, groping about how to move forward after she died, that was always in our minds, was something to bury. But as Tom mentioned, I'm a little bit feisty, and if somebody tells me not to do something, I'm more inclined to go ahead and do it. So as I got older, and I was always very curious about why it is that some people suffer so much with their mental health. It was my good fortune to be a newspaper reporter. And in that job, you're paid to ask questions. You're paid to go up to complete strangers and ask them very searing questions. My husband says I still do that at cocktail parties. But anyway, I can't help it. I'm just curious about the human condition. And so when I was a new mom, my son Charlie, who's now 37, we were down in Chicago. We were home visiting my parents, and Charlie had some kind of fever, and he was just up fussing in the middle of the night. And to shut him up so he wouldn't wake up the whole family, I grabbed a book off the shelf. This was in my childhood bedroom. And the first book that I grabbed was my high school yearbook. And when I opened it up and started leafing through the pages, I came across my picture. And my picture, the teeth had been blackened out and there were devil horns and a little pitchfork. Well, I was surprised at that, but I realized that the person who drew that had been my sister Nancy. And at that point, she'd been dead for, I think, about 9 years. But I was so taken by that. It was the middle of the night. I'm laughing, but I'm also crying. And I realized, like, that son of a gun pulled a fast one on me. And here she is. It felt like this little kind of visit from the beyond the grave. And she was here to share a laugh at my expense, of course. But I was so moved by that. And I missed her so much. And I thought, damn it, I really never had the chance to kind of grieve her properly. We were so ashamed of the way that she died that we didn't get to process really the life that had been lost to us. So I don't know, I was hormonal, I was a nursing mother, and I'm a journalist and I write to figure things out. So I wrote an essay and I submitted it to Alan Borsick, who was then the editor of the old Milwaukee Journal Sunday magazine that maybe some of you remember fondly. Anyway, so I was on maternity leave. I wasn't even at the paper. I think I mailed it to him and he loved it. And he said, well, I'd really like to put this in the magazine. I'd like to make it the cover. And he commissioned an artist to draw a beautiful portrait of my sister Nancy. Well, when that article came out, my father was livid. He was so angry and he said, why would anybody want to write about something so personal and something so embarrassing? And my mother, who was she wasn't really deferential to my dad, but she was not as feisty as I am, but she was very feisty that day. And she jumped right in and she said, Bill, she needs to write about this. This is how she figures out her world. So he shut up, the story ran, and wow, the reaction both in the newsroom and from the readers of the Milwaukee Journal was tremendous. And so I knew from that day forward that so many people are suffering with the shame of mental illness in their families, and that mental illness really it shouldn't be a cause to be ashamed, but it is. So I wanted to know why that is so. And so I was lucky, as I said, I was lucky enough to have a job that allowed me to follow my curiosity. And that's what I did really for the better part of my career, except for a little departure where I wrote a gossip column for a while. And that was very silly, but we're not here to talk about the damn gossip column because that was just a stupid way to make a living when my kids were little and I could be home with them for the most part. But by and large, I really spent most of my career doing just that, going out and talking to perfect strangers. So I think our audio visual is on a fritz maybe. And so we don't have the opportunity to go to the next slide, I don't think. But I was going to show you that then tragedy struck our family a second time. And my younger brother, Danny, also took his own life. And so after that happened, that was in 1997, and a great friend of mine, the late, great Don Walker, who was a city editor at the Milwaukee Journal, said to me, hey, I remember that story that you wrote about your sister Nancy and how impactful that was. And he said, would you ever think about writing what it was like for your family to go through a suicide a second time? And I said, are you out of your damn mind? Like, I am not going to write that story. It was just way too painful. And I just thought, well, why would anybody follow our advice? We don't have a very good track record in dealing with people who suffer. But anyway, the more I got to thinking about it, the more I realized, well, wait a minute. I'm asking people to share their stories with me so I can help them, I can help the readers understand the mental health system the least that I can do is to share our family story. And so I did write that story, and that appeared, that was on a Sunday as well, maybe a year or two after. Oh, okay. You know what? If it's okay with you, I would just as soon do away with the slides, if that's all right. Okay, all right. So, okay. Oh, you're hearing me now? Okay. Anyway, after I wrote a story about my brother Danny, and then the cat was really out of the bag, and then I was really, I think, marked for the rest of my life as doing, going around the country and writing stories about why it is. I was asking two questions. Number one is, why is mental health care in America so problematic? Why is it so broken? And number two, what can we do about it? And so that's what I did. And it was a lot easier for me to ask those strangers than it was my brothers and sisters or my parents. And so what I learned, I was going to tell you the 5 myths. So the myths about mental health. And the first thing is that the mental health system is really not a system. So a system is defined as a set of entities that work together, and really nothing, almost nothing about the way that mental health care in America operates is coordinated or works together. So what do I mean by that? And because we're a crowd of more than one person, it's a very good bet that people in this in this room have either suffer from their own mental illness or have family members that do. And so, and to that end, one of my favorite quotes comes from Thomas Insel, who was the director of the National Institute of Mental Health. And he said, there are 2 kinds of families in America: those with mental illness and those who don't have mental illness yet. So in other words, we're all going to be touched by this. But what I observed as a reporter is that there's not a coordinated care system. So one doctor might not talk to the other doctor. It's a very siloed approach. Insurance companies do not provide the same coverage that they would if it were a different illness, say cancer or heart disease. You really have to plead your case. There's a special telephone line that you call if you're seeking coverage for mental health care. It's a whole separate entity. There's a tremendous amount of discrimination in our culture, in our society, against people who suffer from mental illness. It's very difficult for people with diagnoses of depression or other forms of illness to sustain a job. Employers aren't always very understanding of their need for, you can't see it on an X-ray. You can't see it in a blood test. So it's very hard to prove. And I think there's a lot of skepticism or unbelief when it comes to what somebody is struggling with. So that would be my biggest myth that I would like to bust here in this room right now. And that is that the mental health system is not a system. Something else that I learned as somebody who spent all those years writing about people struggling with mental illness is that they're human beings. And so that sounds like a very facetious or almost snarky thing to say. But when you think about it, the way that we have treated people with mental illness in history, throughout history, has really been scandalous. So we have set people with mental illness so far apart. Back in the old days, we would build these asylums and put them on the outskirts of town so that people didn't have to see or think about them. And they were locked held behind locked doors. And then in the advent of medications like Thorazine, which came out in the mid-1940s, then people were basically just kept sedated. So it was easier to kind of other them, to refer to people with mental illness as the mentally ill and not as human beings, not as our brothers and sisters. So that's my second myth that I'd like to bust right here, right now, is that people with mental illness are different than you and me, because they're not. And then additionally, or adding on to that, is the need to listen to them, to find ways to have conversations with people who are suffering. This is a lot easier said than done. So again, those of you who have people in your family who are suffering with, let's say, depression, you know that the burden of their illness is such that they're so withdrawn and they're so unable really to have a conversation. And it's very frustrating. And I can remember so many times when my sister Nancy would be in her bed day after day after day. And I was embarrassed at that as a little kid. And I was mad. And I didn't have the compassion or the understanding to make a space to have a conversation with her, to acknowledge that this was an illness. This wasn't something that she chose. So another myth is that mental illness is a character flaw. It's a condition of either bad parenting or it's a moral failure. But really what mental illness is an illness. So and we don't know enough yet in our scientific community hasn't advanced our understanding of it enough yet to fully understand, what it is that causes some people to have these very erratic forms of behavior. So our family illness is bipolar, which is, formerly known as manic depression. And that is manifest in just as it sounds. So sometimes very, very low, stuck in bed, unable to eat, maybe unable to do anything really except to eat, sleep, and poop. And then the flip side of that is the mania. So very frenetic behavior, wild spending sprees, great declarations, claims that you can do a whole lot more than you're really able to do. And so, we are beginning to know that if you just look at the genetics in my family, I mean, out of the 8 kids, 4 suffer from, two have died from their illness, and 2 others suffer greatly, I would say, in a debilitating capacity. So that's a high percentage. But we're not far enough along yet in understanding the cause of mental illnesses, and sadly, the cure. So a lot of medication is very imprecise. They basically just throw stuff at you and they add, and then they add some more, and then they add some more, and you become very foggy and very unresponsive. So we need to do a whole lot better in terms of understanding mental illness. And how do we do that is that we go out and we have conversations like the ones that we're having right now, and not be ashamed of mental illness, because really the cure begins when we have the courage to have these conversations and to make space. So another thing that I've learned in writing this book is when it comes to people who are suicidal, people who are so desperate from their illness that really they think the best or the only recourse they have is to take their own life. And that's a very uncomfortable conversation to have, but it's one that we really need to learn how to have. So we need to have the language to talk to somebody in who we love, somebody in our life who is feeling so despairing, and find a way to engage them, to let them know, I care about you. I'm sorry you're suffering. Set aside your judgment of what caused that. You don't know what caused it. Probably just genetics, but find a way to have a conversation with that person. Let them know that they love you, that you love them, and that you're here for them and you can help them. I'm gonna just say a few more things, and then I would love to open this up for either questions or comments. But I'll tell you that the week before my brother Danny died, he wrote me a letter. Now, Danny was 14 years old when our sister Nancy died. And out of all the kids in the family, he was probably the most embarrassed that Nancy had taken her own life. And Danny certainly never understood that, and he was very angry. He had a lot of unresolved anger about it. And as his own illness began to present itself, he didn't know how to talk about it. And he was so ashamed of the mental illness that he was experiencing that he just shut down and he separated himself from the family. But towards the end of his days, he did come around the family more. And on this one day, I got a letter from Danny acknowledging what it was like for him to live with mental illness. And it was really a confessional. And he said, you know, it's a terrible illness and it causes you to think awkwardly and to do terrible things. And he was apologizing. And he said, really only love and understanding can conquer this. And when I read it, I thought, that sounds kind of cheesy. That's not how my brother Danny talked. He was a wise guy. He was not given to these kind of profound, deep statements. Then, of course, the next week he took his own life. And I realized, you know, too late that had been really kind of a suicide note that he had sent to me. But what I did was I wrote his words to me, his last words to me, down on an index card. I wrote, only love and understanding can conquer this disease. And I taped it to the side of my computer in the newsroom at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And that became my battle cry. And so I'll just fast forward to say that this book then gives an account of what it was like growing up in our family, what I learned as a reporter, and how finally, at the end, you know, just a few years ago, I decided I'm going to turn that notebook around on myself now, and I'm going to take all the lessons that I learned from complete strangers and go back and really look at my family of origin and look for those times in our lives when we could have had those conversations, but we didn't. And when I went to my brothers and sisters a couple years ago and said, hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't I write a book about our family? And they were like, what? But bless their hearts, they agreed with me that if we could tell our story in an unblinking way, warts and all, tell what it was really like and really bear witness, because that's what this book is meant to do. It's meant to bear witness to this is what happened to our family in this one particular era and this one little place in time. And versions of this, I'm sure, I know from my reporting days, happened in many other households all over America, all over the world. And if we can find ways to have these conversations and talk to one another and break these myths, bust these ideas that are wrong, and find the ways to talk with love and understanding, that we can do our part to really make life for those who suffer that much better. So I so appreciate, I'm completely preaching to the choir here, because you good people, like I know you, many of you have spent your whole life in service to other people, and you're doing so with all of your concern and just to be here to have this conversation. So I don't need you. I mean, we do need you, but go out and clone yourselves and make all the people that you know as nice as you are. And you know, let's have these conversations. Let's spread the word, and let's make a space for people in our lives who are suffering, to give them the comfort of our attention and our love. So I thank you so much, and I encourage you to ask any questions that you would like.
So we have 15 minutes for questions, and I need to ask one thing, JC.
Yeah.
Does the speaker need to repeat the question for the recording?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for myth busting. I think those are important. And I wonder if we know enough about causes. Two things I wonder about. One is we've heard there's been a great increase in mental health challenges, problems coming from COVID with young people and school shutdowns, and I don't know what else, but does anybody know what's going on with that? And secondly, with all the chemicals in our society, we know if there's been any increase in mental health problems because of all the
Caused by chemicals? Yeah. Two good questions. So one is with COVID, the increase, the spike in the incidence of mental illness, is there a relationship with COVID? And then also with chemicals in our world. I am not a scientist. I got a C in biology at Regina Dominican High School in 1973. But I did actually do a bunch of work. This is so funny. This was a total departure, but I did write a bunch of articles about bisphenol A. It was just a fluke. I had no business writing those stories, but I was paired with a very bright science writer, and the two of us set the world on fire and wrote a bunch of stories about how chemicals are implicated in health effects like breast cancer and various diabetes, various ailments. So, and I know that mental illness, there is concern. So I don't know nearly enough about the science of it to speak with any authority whatsoever, but I know those are operating theories. I do know this, that suicide is now the second leading cause of death in people ages 14 to 35. And it's spiked. And in the time since my brother Danny died, the overall incidence of suicide is up 35%. So it's staggering, and it's quite confounding. And how is it? It's a paradox, you know, that we live in an era right now when we've never been more connected to one another because of things like the internet, right? But at the same time, there's so much isolation, and COVID certainly exacerbated. COVID underscored for so many people what it's like to be lonely and to be fearful. And those are two of the prevalent emotions of somebody with depression or other forms of mental illness. So that's why I think you see a lot of public acknowledgement now of the ravages of mental illness. You can't even watch a baseball game or a football game without an ad coming on about your mental health. And if you're not feeling well, go see somebody. So hooray for that. There's so much more public discussion about mental illness. The problem is that we still have a great shortage in caregivers. So the great disconnect, there's a huge amount of need and not as many mental health providers as what we do need. Yeah.
I'm wondering if trauma is also the cause. I mean, for my own family, very much cause for my mother and for my, intergenerational.
Intergenerational trauma, yes.
As you say, I'm also feeling as clergy, I'm feeling people of the, and, and it's certainly isolation, but it's also trauma.
Yeah.
And also, there are really not enough people. If the one person, the therapist who is really helping the person abroad very well, has way too many people, and he's already in his 80s.
Right. Yeah. Well, where I think a lot of hope lies, and certainly where there is tremendous need, is for things like mental health first aid. So there are springing up now are pockets of training seminars. There are programs now for bus drivers, for librarians. You know, a lot of people with severe mental illness who are really roaming the streets spend their days in public libraries. And so there are opportunities aplenty for us to learn the language of mental illness. And again, how to have these conversations and how to do so respectfully. And yeah, the burden is tremendous. The case log of these mental health professionals is staggering. So they cannot crank psychiatrists out of medical schools fast enough to even catch up with the demand. So it's really going to be on us. We need to learn on a grassroots level how to have these conversations with our friends and our neighbors and our family members. Did you have a question, sir? Or
Yes,
comment?
The stigmatization
Yes.
Of mental illness is not just an American problem.
Mhm.
It's a worldwide problem.
Yes.
And so I think we need to emphasize, it sounded as though you meant that it was primarily an American problem. And I wanted to share an article that I read years ago when I was an undergraduate in college. It was an article in Scientific American, that magazine, called The Pecking Order. And it was about flocks of chickens. And it was a scientific research paper, and it demonstrated through all the statistics and measurements that they made that in a large flock of chickens, every chicken has a position in the pecking order. And if you're low in the pecking order, all the other chickens can peck you, but you can only peck those who are below you. And this is documented, it's not fancy imagination, this is the case for chickens.
Sure.
And that's where the phrase pecking order comes from.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, in my experience, most people with mental problems have been finding it difficult to find a role, a purpose, a position in life for themselves.
Right.
In other words, a place in the pecking order.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And I think if you're looking for an overall cause, that would probably be it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom there. You're right. I didn't mean at all to suggest that it's only an American problem at all. My only experience is covering the United States of America, but so I don't know. I'm not familiar with what goes on in other countries, but certainly, yes. And I can tell you as the fourth of 8 children that there definitely is a pecking order. But I think especially to your point, sir, about the need for all of us to feel value and valued, and to find a place that in this life that makes us feel like we're helping and that we're part of a community. So yeah, that's very broadly said, but I just want to make this distinction too. We all at one time in our life are going to be not mentally well. We wouldn't be human beings if we weren't. We have disappointments in life, jobs lost, or friends who die, or children who disappoint us. Whatever it is, we're going to go through times of turmoil. Everybody's going to have that. There are, though, those who, by nature of their genetics, suffer from serious mental illness. So it's a distinct category in the good old DSM, the diagnostic manual, but that's a small percent but it's a lot of people. It's millions of people who suffer from serious mental illness, that their illness causes it's a thought disorder that doesn't allow them to hold down a job or live independently. And those people do need care. And I think when we, in our, sometimes we write those people off, again, like it's something that they chose to have, and they didn't, but they do need care. So we were very quick to close down the asylums, which, thank God, a lot of those places were hellholes. But the fact of the matter is, there are many, many people who are not capable of living on their own right now, and they need custodial care. There still is a great need for custodial care. It's not a popular opinion, but it's a true one. Yes, sir.
I'd like to say that I really appreciate your clear, articulate message. It's easier to understand even for me. English is not my first language. I agree with you in your theme that there is a danger of underdiagnosing.
Yes.
But you think that there is also danger in overdiagnosing. For example, I came from South Korea. When I was in Korea, I read a newspaper one time. A young man went to see a psychiatrist, and he was told that he had a bipolar disorder. And not knowing what to say, he was so devastated with the new news.
Yes.
And as soon as he got out of the office, he went to a mountain and then hanged himself.
Yeah. Right.
There are many people with limited knowledge of psychiatry.
Right.
And accurate diagnosis.
Right.
They become a victim of labeling and stereotyping and for the rest of us. And I like to say that there may be a danger in overdiagnosing and blanket diagnosis. So if the psychiatrist has said to him that you may or may not have a bipolar disease, but here is the good news.
Right.
And there's good medication.
Yes.
Necessary, and there are couple skills. And guess what? There are brilliant people in bipolar community, professors,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
writers. So you may have some weaknesses, but to compensate it, you may also have blessings in your situation.
You've said that beautifully. Yeah, absolutely. And I think really that's the key. This is an excellent point, is that there are blessings that come with our human condition. Thank you for that. Whenever we label things and make these bold pronouncements, we're not leaving room for our humanity. We put that person in a category. You're a bipolar, you're a schizophrenic, you're not a human being. When you talk about human beings first, and then living with these challenges, and again, a lot of mental illness is also, it's not, it's static. It's not, what's the right word? It ebbs and flows. So, you can have periods of remission or periods of feeling well. So yeah, I think it's very tricky when you just assign a label, and what that does is it takes away people's hope and it takes away their humanity. So yeah, yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Very good organization. I had issue. Attended 12 years at the
Yeah, NAMI actually was founded in Madison, Wisconsin. It's nationwide, and they do tremendous work. It was begun right as they were closing down all those asylums in the late 60s, early 70s. And all of a sudden, these very ill people were sent home to live with their older parents who were really at wit's end about how to cope. And NAMI does beautiful work in taking away just that othering or the stigma of mental illness. One more question. Yeah. Wow, that's correct. I don't know who to pick. I'm gonna go. Yeah. Hmm. Right. Sure. Yeah. So the question is about the increase, especially among young people, with the explosion in social media. And yes, I just read an article just this very morning about that. There was a movie that came out some time ago called Screenagers. That's about the ill effects of our kids overexposed. There's a estimate that a typical teenager today spends 16 hours a day. 16 hours a day on social media. Well, right. They should be sleeping and they're not. And they should be studying and they should be out in fresh air, but they're not. Anyway, so it's a huge problem. It's something that goes right to their sense of self-worth, and it's undermining that. So that's a, woo, you could write a whole library of books about that one. But anyway, I know our time is running up, but I'm so excited because everyone is raising their hand. Everyone wants to talk because that means that this topic affects so many people, which makes me sad, but it makes me happy to know that you're so engaged and want to help. And I know that you are helping, and I'm very, very, very grateful. And so I will stick around and you can talk to me after that, but I'm getting the hook here. So yay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Meg Kissinger. And for those of you who are still patiently hanging online without pictures, with only audio, they have a picture. Well, excellent. But we also had PowerPoint issues here as well. So our apologies for the technical difficulties that we had today, but the recording will be online, and all of you who signed up either online or in person will have access to the online recording as well. And we thank you all for coming. We especially also would like to thank First Unitarian for hosting our Tuesdays in March program again for the umpteenth year in a row. And in addition to that, we would like to thank Aladdin's that did the catering. We would like to thank the Peace and International Issues PIC Committee, the chair, Jean Manch, and all of the dedicated helpers, J.C. Mitchell, our program coordinator, Tom and Katie Heinen, Pat McFarland. And this is where I really get egg on my face. I really apologize if I forgot Peg Taliavila. If I forgot anyone else, Shazad Hussein for helping out at the registration as well. Thank you. And I hope that everyone has a safe and healthy year, and we hope to see you next year at Tuesdays in March. Have a great day.